day school for many years and lived in Fairfield County. Not quite as crowded back then. We come on back in Greenwich or Stamford, I think, oh my gosh, there are a lot of people who live here. But one of the things I will say in adding to the introduction is that I have been in the profession for a very long time, 43 years to be exact, and I have taught elementary grades, middle school grades, high school grades, college classes, and grad school classes. So I have taught from age 3 to age 35, and my thesis tonight, the one takeaway message tonight is that the work done here by this faculty is infinitely more consequential than the work done at Yale. Okay, and I will explain that. And by the way, I have friends who are professors at Yale who do not disagree with me. Okay? So I said the work done here is infinitely more consequential. And I'll talk a little bit about what I mean by that. Let me start by asking you to go back in time. For me, it would be 40 years. Okay? For many of you, it would be a lot shorter trip back in time. But I want to ask you to try to remember the very first time you rented a car. Now, some of you will remember it because, for me, it was a stunning experience. It was a shocking, completely shocking experience. Does anybody remember, was there anything unusual about the first time you went or tried to rent a car? Okay, let me give you my experience. I am 23 years old. I'm in the military. I'm in the U.S. Army. It's during Vietnam. So, I mean, there was a fairly strong anti-military sentiment in America. I was aware of that, but I love my country. I didn't love that war, but I agreed to serve as a college graduate, and I was assigned to a medical division at a hospital in San Antonio, Texas. And we had a surprise long weekend. It was not planned. I had no knowledge that I was going to have 5 days off. My girlfriend at the time was teaching second grade in a public school in Boston. I hadn't seen her in 6 months, and I thought, okay, I'm going to get on. I'm going to find a plane. Okay, I'm going to get to Boston. And I'm going to walk into her second grade classroom. And it is going to be a scene right out of Hollywood. And these kids are going to see an embrace that they will remember for the rest of their lives. I get to the airport in San Antonio. I get a flight. It's a red eye. It's an overnight flight. I arrive in Logan, and I'm going to rent a car. I'm going to rent a car. I know where the school is. And so, I'm 23, and I am in front of one of the car dealerships. And the salesperson says to me, can I help you? And I said, yes, I need a car. She said, what kind of car? I said, I don't care any kind of car. Whatever car you have now, I'll take. She said, well, we have a sedan. I said, no, I really don't care. Whatever is right on the top of the queue. And she says, fine. Well, she has a Ford Fiesta or something. Fine. So she asks for my identification. I give her and I'm in uniform. I give her my driver's license and my military ID. She looks at it and she says to me, I'm very sorry, sir, but I cannot rent you a car. My immediate response was, this is an anti-war. She's not going to rent a car to a warmonger. And it was stunning to me, she's not going to rent me a car. And I had actually never rented a car before. I thought this was easy. She said, I can't rent you a car. I'm shot out of a cannon. I got to get to this elementary school. And I said, well, Avis can, Budget can. I mean, seriously? And she looked at me and she said, I don't make the rules, sir, but you're not old enough to rent a car. You're 23 years old, and you have to be 25 to rent a car in America. So I said, ma'am, look, please, I don't really mean to be rude to you. I know you don't make the rules, but I'm authorized to drive tanks. Do you think a Ford Pinto for the weekend is going to be over my head? I mean, trust me on this. I think you're going to survive it. I'll survive. Avis will survive. She said, no, you have to be 25 years old. Well, I went to Budget. I went to it, and I was declined. Now, fast forward, that has changed. Military, there are exceptions for the military, and there are also surcharges if you are between 22 and 25, they will rent a car, but there's a heightened fee. Why? Why did all of those car companies have a policy, uniform national policy, that they would not rent to drivers who are under 25? Why?
Prefrontal cortex doesn't fully develop until 20.
Okay. They didn't know that then. Okay, all they had then was the actuarial statistics. What they had was the stats on 22-year-olds and 23-year-olds and 25-year-olds and accident statistics. So based upon that, they had determined that renting to a 22-year-old or a 23-year-old was a bad business model. You can't make money on this people. It's a problem. Now, fast forward. Back in the days when I was declined, the only access to the human brain for research purposes was X-ray technology and post-mortem dissections. You want to study the brain, those are your options. The problem with X-ray technology is the brain is entirely soft tissue, and therefore it's X-ray transparent. So the only thing a researcher is going to see in an X-ray, an occasional bullet in a crime lab investigation, but you're not going to see a whole lot else on an X-ray. And post-mortem dissections, researchers are looking at the brains of the deceased, of the dead people, and very often they're people who are aged or sick. Okay, now, 1980s, 1990s, we now have incredible, non-invasive, completely non-invasive imaging techniques, like functional MRIs, that allow a neuroscientist to stick an electrode in a human brain cell of a patient who is alive, healthy, perhaps young, awake, and connected to a computer screen. The neuroscientist can actually watch the chemical pathways of human thoughts as they're being thought. We can ask a question or have a child perform, a mathematical operation or put together a puzzle or draw something or remember their birthday party. And we can actually see what parts of the brain light up and what parts of the brain shut down. So neuroscientists can map the brain. And among many things that has told us is that the prefrontal cortex, you're correct, the prefrontal cortex, also called the executive functioning brain, it is the front of your head. Okay, that part of the brain is physically present. It's anatomically there, but it's not reliably used. Okay, it's not the default brain until we are in our mid-20s. Women younger, men a little older. The human brain, there's an architectural design error in the human brain in that it's actually three brains. And we downshift and upshift into those three different brains, as adults. But we don't get to that opportunity until we're in our 20s. Okay, so birth to age 2, infants. Okay. Babies are born with 100 billion brain cells. Most of them are not connected. The brain cells that are connected are the central nervous system, so baby can breathe. That's working. But human brains are entirely personalized, meaning every experience you have begins to map the brain. It begins to create neural connections. So, in the brain of an infant, the word mommy and the face of her mother, that's I-95. That's a neural pathway that has been well worn by age 1. You look at age birth to maybe 2, the brain is, it's actually called the reptilian brain. Okay, and that first brain, what does it run on? It runs on instincts and urges. So a baby will turn away from a harsh light to protect his or her eyes. No one taught the baby to do that. How does the baby know how to do that? The baby knows how to do that because it's part of our ancestral legacy. Okay, it's an instinct, it's an urge. Babies cry when they're hungry. Okay, it's effective. It sends a message. How does the baby know how to do that? Instincts and urges. It's built in. It's a built-in mechanism for survival. Okay? Because at birth, as premature as our brains are, there is a survival program in the brain. We are pre-programmed to survive. When a baby needs to be changed, the baby cries. Tells the parent, I need some assistance. Okay? So that's birth to age 2. When you get into your 20s, okay, we go from the first brain, okay, I'm going to skip the second brain. Okay, the first brain is the reptilian brain. The third brain that we begin to develop and use reliably is the human brain. What does that run on? Well, it runs on experience, education, memory. I mean, the nice thing about the human brain is we can remember bad experiences and not repeat them. We can remember good experiences. We can learn things and remember those things. Okay, so the first brain runs on instincts and urges. The third brain runs on education and experience. What does the middle brain run on? It's called the mammalian brain, and it's the brain that's deployed in the classrooms in this school. It's the brain that's deployed in childhood and in adolescence. And what's the gasoline, what's the juice in that brain?
Curiosity.
That's a component of it, that's a disposition. Okay, but the actual motivating mechanism in the mammalian brain, the brain in childhood, it's emotion. Emotion. Okay, now keep in mind, we didn't say feelings. Okay, there's a big difference between emotions and feelings when you're talking about how the brain operates. Feelings are psychological events in the brain. They are generally temporary responses to life events. So sadness is a feeling. Joy is a feeling. Okay? We're generally aware when we're having a feeling. That doesn't necessarily mean we can control it, but we know that there's a feeling that has swept over us, and maybe we like it, we're going to savor it, or maybe we're going to try to interrupt it, or maybe we're going to try to provide some therapy for it, but we're aware of it. Emotions, when you talk about the brain, they're not psychological events, they're neurological events in the brain. Okay, they occur deep in our neurology, and they influence our behavior, very often without our permission or with our knowledge. Okay, so the emotions that I'm talking about, which are very much a part of how children live and learn, okay, they are very much a part of the survival program. I said we were programmed to survive. Okay, how do emotions help us to survive? Well, let's take a look at 2 primal emotions that are part of the human experience, very much a part of childhood. 2 of them in particular. One of them is fears. Children have built-in fears. Why do they have fears? Because fears help us to survive. Okay. And there are appropriate fears. Okay. They also have an inbred neurological need for attachments. They need to have human attachments. Why? Well, humans, we're tribal people. We don't live alone. We live in groups. We live in groups because that's how we survive. So children have built-in fears, and they have a built-in need for attachments. Okay. What does that mean? Well, let's take a look at a classroom setting. In a classroom, information comes into a child's brain through the 5 senses. And before it gets to the intellectual brain, okay, the information is received by the child, visually, auditory, manually, and when that information is received, it is processed first through the limbic system, the emotional brain. It goes from the emotional brain up to the intellectual brain. But it passes through the emotional brain first. Not in adults. Adults go right to the intellectual brain. Okay, if you're in med school, what's happening around you emotionally is not all that significant. Okay, but if you're in 5th grade, the surround is extremely significant. Okay, let me give you what I think is the best example I've ever seen of the transfer of information from a stimuli into a child's brain. I'm watching television one night, and I see something I've seen before, horrified by it, offended by it, mad as hell by it, but it's very common. It is a local Connecticut station. This was up in Waterbury. And there's a reporter who's standing with a guy who's in fatigues. This is a guy who just got back from Afghanistan. And Channel 8 Connecticut has said that this is Sergeant, Michael Johnson, and he's been deployed in Afghanistan for the last 18 months, and his family is expecting him home for Christmas, but he's come home a month early, and he's going to surprise his son in school. You seen this? I mean, they run this. I've seen this 4 or 5 times a year. So here's the reporter, and here's the sergeant, and they're walking down the hallway of a public elementary school in Waterbury, and they're going to surprise Michael, who's a 6th grader. And I'm thinking, this should really be a private family moment. Come on. But I know people love it. People eat it up. It's human drama. I don't like it at all, but I've worked with kids so long, I know that those moments are precious and they're not for public consumption. But they didn't ask me. And it was a fascinating video clip because they get to the door of the classroom, they open the door, and the camera pans on the kid. The kid looks at the door. He sees his father. Hasn't seen his father in 18 months. He's 12. I'm sure his mother and his grandparents have said to him, Daddy is safe. Don't worry about Daddy. Daddy will be coming home. Daddy's safe. You know what? A 12-year-old knows better. That 12-year-old knows he's being appeased and accommodated, and I guarantee you that 12-year-old has been terrified, alone in the dark in his bedroom at night, worrying about Daddy. And there have been visuals that he has seen of military people who've come back missing a limb. So, believe me, for this kid to see his father after 18 months. So the camera pans on the kid. The kid looks up from his desk. He sees his father and immediately bursts into tears. And then a split second after he bursts into tears, he buries his head in his arm, and he walks over to the door, and he pushes his father into the hallway, where they have their private reunion. Okay, what happened? What happened was, when the boy saw his father, that information went into his brain through the limbic system, the emotional brain. The emotion responded first. A split second later, the cortex responded, the intellectual brain responded. And the intellectual brain said, Mike, that's your dad. And he's home and he's safe. And by the way, Mike, you're crying. And you're crying in front of Billy McGillicuddy and Bobby Johnson, and they really didn't give you a whole lot of grief about it. So he went from an emotional response to an intellectual response, and the intellectual response included some embarrassment in front of his peers, which is why he buried his crying face in his arm, pushed his father out the door. As bad as it was to watch it, I did capture it. I did get the clip from the station so that I can show this to educators and say, here's an example of what happens first. Math anxiety, public speaking phobia, writer's block. These are things that start emotionally first. When children recall, when adults recall things they've learned in childhood, what comes back in the recall is not just the information, but the emotion that accompanied the intake of the information. So you learn something, anything. You learn to draw, you learn to paint, you learn to sing, you learn math, you learn to write. If you are 8, if you are 12, or you're 13, and that occurs in a setting in which you feel safe and known and valued, the chances are very good that you will remember that information, in a very positive way, because the intake was positive. Okay, so let me explain it another way. There are 4 levels of schooling: elementary, secondary, college, and grad school. All 4 levels of schooling deal in information, content, facts, and skills. That's what we teach. But these years deal in something much more consequential than the acquisition of knowledge. And that is the development of dispositions toward knowledge. Okay, what do I mean by that? What's a disposition? People confuse the word disposition with the word temperament. Temperament is largely genetic. It's largely present at birth and fairly stable throughout our lives. We choose breeds of dogs based upon the reliability of certain temperaments in certain breeds. And there are humans, a baby is born, arrives on the birthing table, a brand new infant, looks around, displeased, spends 82 years on the planet, largely displeased. Temperament is our internal weather, our internal climate. And when I say it's stable, that's good news for some people. It's not so good news for other people. But it's genetic, and you inherit some of your temperament. Dispositions are learned behaviors. And these are behaviors that people they're not as aware of the influence of environment in learning and adapting and internalizing these behaviors. So for example, most people understand that curiosity, kids are born curious. Children become more or less curious depending upon the environment in which they express their curiosity. So for example, I was superintendent of schools in one of America's wealthiest public school systems. And I watched us diminish the curiosity of elementary school kids. And how did we do it? We did it not because my faculty didn't know any better. We did it because there was a state and national obsession with standardized tests. And the skills that are measured on standardized tests, remember, these are skills that are measured by a machine, Scantron, answer sheets. So we overteach essentially low-level skills in public education because we need the score because Finland has a higher score. Some of the best people I know in public education have left because they just can't do it anymore. No Child Left Behind is the single best thing that ever happened to independent schools. Because it started with a wonderful idea, more appropriate to the urban areas than to Fairfield County. And then it became a program on steroids. And you have, even my friends who teach in Greenwich public schools, the amount of time they spend on test prep is positively obscene. At the expense of activities that foster creativity, collaboration among kids, and curiosity. Parents, over the years, very often mothers would come to me and they would say, Doug, how long does it take to teach a child how to read? They have a 2-year-old with them. How long does it take to teach a child how to read? And I know they were really hoping for an answer that would enable them to go back and create a reader quickly. So how long does it take to teach a child how to read? And I would give them an answer that was honest and accurate, although I can imagine it sounded like sarcasm to some people. I would say, well, how long does it take to teach a child how to read? For most children, average children, even above average, smart kids, it depends on when you start. If you start at age 3, it takes 3 years. If you start at age 4, it takes 2 years. If you start at age 5, it takes 1 year. But the difference between starting at age 3 and starting at age 5 is you could win a hollow victory by having a child learn to read early. And I would say it's probably not reading, it's more like word calling, because reading involves a decoding of the sound-symbol relationship in our language. It also requires a high degree of comprehension of what's been read. And to me, it requires a certain amount of pleasure in the act. But you could create an early reader at the expense of a child who views reading, who forever views reading, certainly through adolescence views reading, as a pleasurable activity. You could actually diminish the child's disposition toward choosing to read as a pleasurable activity. So you got the kid reading at age 4, so the neighbors and grandma would be impressed. And this, by the way, not really reading, although it looks like it. But at age 15, no way is that kid going to pick up a book if there's Grand Theft Auto on a disc. So, I mean, let's think about that. Optimism is a disposition. Optimism is learned behavior. Children learn it from models, they learn it from experience. Independence, resourcefulness, morality. Where does morality come from? Morality does not come from the intellectual brain. There's a part of morality that comes from the intellectual brain. If you really want to rob a bank, but you figure, I'm going to get caught. I just know I'm going to get caught. The circumstances are not good for me. That's an intellectual decision. But most morality comes from the emotional brain. People choose to be moral for emotional reasons. Mostly because this is something I'm not going to do because that's not who I am. It's not who I am. It's not my definition of myself. I couldn't live with myself if I did this. It's emotional. All of that, optimism, resourcefulness, charitability, or quarrelsomeness, all of these are dispositions that, in fact, are learned in childhood and are forever. So you look at somebody like Bernie Madoff, one of the biggest crooks in modern history. He cleaned out the pension accounts of God knows how many people. How did that happen? What created a Bernie Madoff? He didn't take enough ethics courses when he was in law school. No. Somehow Bernie Madoff grew up with a diminished sense of other people. Other people don't matter. Human version to guilt and shame. Okay. But Bernie Madoff was created, and he was created in childhood. So, the notion of what happens from age 4, 7, 13, 15, what happens, what happens is the development of the academic and intellectual child, but it's also the development of a child who, the holy grail in my profession is the lifelong learner. Somebody who does find learning interesting, somebody who does find adventure interesting, an adventure that's found through academic pursuit. Also somebody who finds other people interesting and relationships rewarding. I mentioned earlier that we're pre-programmed to survive, and survival for most children is entirely focused on parents and the adults in their lives. So, when people say to me, well, my child loves his or her teachers, that shouldn't be a wonderful and rare event. Kids really should love their teachers. Because any kind of social anxiety impedes learning. Social anxiety, the body produces cortisol, it's the fight or flight response, child can't concentrate, doesn't feel safe. The relationship between children and their teachers, especially in the limbic system years, enormously important. And then, there's that other period of life, adolescence. What is every 11-year-old's greatest fear? I'm talking across languages, cultures, and continents, all over the planet. What's every 11-year-old's greatest fear?
Social embarrassment.
11. We're still, 11, we're still, in most countries, still pre-puberc. 11 is still pre-puberc, biologically and emotionally. 11-year-old's greatest fear is to be separated from their parents. Okay, because parents are survival. What's every 13-year-old's greatest fear all across the planet?
Be with their parents.
Yeah, to be seen with their parents. You want your 13-year-old friends to think you actually have an apartment, downtown Greenwich. You're with your parents on weekends, but I have my own place. Every 13-year-old's greatest fear is the loss of social standing. Loss of social standing. Why is that? Because it's not a choice. Kids go to great lengths to have private relationships at age 14, 15, or 16. We did it. Okay, as parents, we say we don't understand it. We don't like it. Okay. When you look at, the history of mankind on this planet, go back to the grasslands of Africa. Look at Romeo and Juliet. Great example. Juliet is promised to Paris. She doesn't want to marry him. She doesn't want to marry anybody. But her mother is a basket case because she's got a 13-year-old spinster in her house. She's not married. This kid's hanging around. She's sick. She's not married. She's still here. She goes to her father and she begs for more time. And there's that wonderful line where her father, Capulet, approaches the mother and says, "Let 14 summers wither in their pride, ere we find her ripe to be a bride." In other words, can she have 14 years? Well, for most of recorded history, modern life is very different now, but for most of life on this planet, when did children achieve social maturity? When did they leave their parents and form their own tribe? At what age? Puberty, 13. As soon as the equipment works, you start to use it, you find a pair bond, and you go off and find your tribe. So biologically and anthropologically, the right time to separate from your family for thousands of years was 13 or 14. We don't live that way now. We can't live it. It's absurd to live that way now. But kids still live that way neurologically, where, a child who's perfectly reasonable, on so many topics, has a meltdown when you say, "We're going to Pittsburgh for the weekend because Nana's having her 80th birthday party, and I'm sorry you can't go to Karen's Sweet 16. And the kid falls apart. Positively falls apart. She can't go to Karen's Sweet 16. Oh my gosh, her world is ended. It's completely irrational, offensive to parents who don't understand. We, by the way, are the same. And the reason for the irrationality is because these are kids who believe that, their survival in the future will be dependent upon achieving social success with their peers. Survival is going to be the peer group. What's so tragic about teenage suicide is generally the result of a child who is socially unsuccessful at age 14 or 15 or 16 and believes that success with the first peer group after puberty predicts success with the peer groups forever. Forever. They don't see they will ever change. My peers don't have any interest in me and probably never will. Which is why, talk about organizations that have the perfect name and the perfect mission statement. A group of people many years ago formed an organization to help kids who are gay and coming out in early adolescence, to help them go through this experience. Do you know what that organization is called?
It Gets Better.
It's called It Gets Better. That's the title. You Google itgetsbetter.com and you see their website, and their message to 15 and 16-year-olds is, it gets better. And no matter what life is like now, it gets a whole lot better. We got a whole lot of people who went through what you went through, and they can tell you about it getting better. Here I know with this, I remember when my son was 17 years old. He was a junior at Brunswick, and he would ask for a car, and I would say, "You have a car?" And I said, "But you have to come home at 11:30. And oddly enough, that was a very early curfew in Greenwich when my kids were growing up. And my son would press for the car, for later in the evening. And at the time, I was not aware of the brain research, which suggests that a 17-year-old in a car is in fact a high-risk proposition because they don't exercise reliable adult judgment. So my son would say to me, he said, "Dad, I really don't understand this. I have never let you down. You have no reason not to trust me. I've been the headmaster's kid for how many years? When have I been an embarrassment to the family? I routinely check my behavior because I know what my name is and your position in the town. You know, and why can't I have the car till midnight or 1 o'clock? My only response at the time was I would say, Alex, it's not that I don't trust you, I do trust you. I don't trust the circumstances. I just don't trust the circumstances of 17-year-olds driving around Greenwich at 12:30 at night. Now, but the problem with how you use this research with a 17-year-old is, I mean, I can't imagine saying, Alex, look, buddy, I love you, I trust you, you're a great kid, you've never let me down. The problem is that I can't let you have the car at midnight because, son, you need to understand, you're missing a part of your brain. And the reason that wouldn't work is because the part of the brain that's missing is the part of the brain that would understand the argument. You're missing part of the brain. Okay, so let me see. I mean, I could go all night, but let me try to wrap up with a couple of important comments. In terms of the development of dispositions, for most of modern history, my generation, your parents' generation, your grandparents' generation, if you went through school and it wasn't a positive experience, if you graduated from school with something less than a very positive memory of schooling, okay, well, that would probably be a disadvantage in your adult life. Okay, schooling wasn't your thing, it was okay, and by the way, you know, there are people who have been highly successful in school and have very bad memories of it. Okay, what they remember is it was never pleasurable. Okay, which is why Amy Chu, a Tiger Mom, I worry about those kids because from what I hear, wasn't ever pleasurable. So if you graduated from schooling a generation or 2 or 3 ago, and you don't have an emotional memory bank that's positive, well, that's a disadvantage. For kids in school today, that's not a disadvantage in their adult future. It's a disability in their adult future. Why is it a disability? If you graduated from law school, med school, vet school, engineering school, architecture school, you name it, you graduated from whatever graduate school you went to a generation ago, and you're 28 or 31 or 32. For most of history, you would have a right to believe on graduation day that you had learned most of what you would need to know for a long career as a family doctor, dentist, orthopedic surgeon, whatever. You've got the diploma, you've graduated. You can ride on that for a 30, 40-year career. That is so not true today. That is not true. The pace of change, the pace of technology, the advancements in every field guarantee that your kids, whatever profession they choose, they will be relearning that profession throughout their careers. You will never really graduate in the future. There will always be things to learn. When I was a kid, my doctor, Dr. John, lived in the neighborhood, had an office in his house. It was the garage in other people's houses, but for him it was the doctor's office. They didn't have a garage. And I went to Dr. John. And then at some point in my childhood, he brought his son into the practice. And his son was 35. When my mother took me to the doctor for a checkup, or I had problems with my ears or whatever, my mother made sure that she said to the nurse, I don't want Dr. Bob. I don't know what she thought. I don't know whether she thought Dr. Bob had a Fisher-Price stethoscope, or he'd bend over to look at me and baseball cards and bubble gum would fall out of his pocket, But no 37-year-old doctor right out of med school was going to look at little Douglas. She wanted the father. Okay, fast forward. A mother takes her daughter, who's sick, to a mother-daughter pediatric medical group. Dr. Karen is the mother, 64 years old, 30 years in the profession. Dr. Amy is right out of med school. She's got 1 year in the profession. Who does the mother hope is going to see the child? The 37-year-old. Why? Because we believe, and it's not an irrational belief, we believe that the 37-year-old, despite the fact she doesn't have the wealth of experience of her mother, she's current. she's current, and medicine has probably changed dramatically many times since the mother graduated from med school. So you bet, our kids will never fully graduate from whatever professional program they attend. Either they think that's exciting and kind of fun, and each new technology is a hoot, and an opportunity to work with new people and learn some new things and build the network, or they just think it's harassment, and they don't want to do it. I mean, you look at the older generation. The older generation is accustomed to having a learning period in life, and then it should be over. So my in-laws, my father was a vastly successful man, has no idea how to turn on his television set, and is mad as hell that he has to learn it. Mad as hell, he has to learn how to turn on the television set. Way too much technology. Okay? And that has to do with his alarm clock. For Christmas, I had to find a low-tech alarm clock. Because the alarm clock he had, you could do banking on this alarm clock. But to get it to change from a 6 o'clock wake up to a 5:30, you had to get the manual out. I have a 30-year-old son. Okay. Let me tell you, the things that he can do that I struggle with, simply because his whole life has been about new technologies. I have a phone, I have a smartphone. For me, it's a phone. It's a phone. What my kid does with his smartphone, it's unbelievable what he does with that smartphone. For me, I gotta learn all that. I'm not from the generation that thinks it's fun to be learning something new every single day. I want to feel confident and finished. I've graduated. Okay? Let me end with some research that I think is interesting. And it's interesting because it gave the independent school community and the public school community, I think, some valuable information. 2008, October, the market plunges. We had been through a scare in the markets after September 11th. But we all knew that was related to a horrific event not likely to be repeated, please. 2008 was the second hit, and people started to feel differently about the future of their wealth. Even wealthy people started to feel perhaps less secure about the future of their wealth. Prior to that, we were living in the long boom. It just seemed as though the market would never really relax. But now it was different. So I'm the head of the Connecticut Association. I got 97 schools, and I'm thinking, okay, what's our future? Am I going to have 97 schools next September, or am I going to have 87 schools next September? And what's the enrollment picture going to be like? So I'm nervous. I'm not alone. Everybody's nervous. So an organization in Delaware called Independent School Management, they decided they were going to take on a project, and it was a give back to the independent school community. They interviewed thousands of independent school parents. And they just did this and provided the results. They got no fee. They're not a nonprofit, they're a for-profit company, but they did this research. And the question was, are you going to go back? Are you planning to re-enroll in your child's independent school? And for those who said yes, they then said, why? What is it that makes it worth it? These are high tuition dollars. There's a free public alternative. Why are you going back? So the data for Connecticut was 88% of independent school parents were going back, which gave me a lot of comfort. Nationally, it was more like 84%. But what was more fascinating were the reasons why people said they were going back. And there were 20 of the most popular reasons, but the top 4 were way ahead of the other 60. Okay, and here are the top 4 reasons why independent school parents say it's worth it, we're going back. Even though now, for some of us, we really feel it. We write that check now, we really feel it. But here's why we're going back. The 4 top reasons, in ascending order. Number 4, we're going back because of the rigor of the program / skill of the faculty. Okay, so I read that in a report that I get, and I think, that's number 4? Number 4 is the rigor of the program and the skill of could get three reasons to go back that trump that. I mean, I thought that's why you spent the money. The rigor of the program, the skill of the faculty. That's number 4. Here's number 3. People say we're going back because of the school's role. The role of the school community as a countercultural influence in my child's life. I understand that. I was a parent, I'm a parent. I understand. I'm a grandparent now. I'm picking schools for my grandchildren, and I'm paying them. And I'm looking for communities that will, in fact, be a countercultural influence in my grandchildren's life. I am sure that parents complained about popular culture throughout the history of mankind. I guarantee that Julius Caesar's mother was concerned about the toga lengths on the girls in his junior high school classes. But I think we can all understand and accept that popular culture now is a saturation experience for children, for all of us. There was a time when parents, in my career, I knew parents who didn't have televisions. There was no television in the house. And these were people who really they could really restrict their child's interaction with popular culture. It's impossible to do that now. You can't do that now. I mean, you could have no television, you could have no computer. But unless kids are living, in a severely restricted social group, believe me. And my own life is a perfect example of how you cannot escape popular culture now. It is the air we breathe. And I say that because I have a fairly restricted interaction with media. I don't watch television. I watch the news and I watch sports. Occasionally the Discovery Channel, whatever. I don't watch any popular television. No interest in it. May have had an interest in it 30 years ago. No interest in it. So I don't watch any popular culture. The only radio I listen to I'll listen to a couple of news stations, a couple of sports stations, NPR. Okay. How is it that I know who Miley Cyrus is and what she did with that phone finger at the award show? How do I know that? How can I possibly know that?
Supermarket.
I don't want to know that. I never gave permission for that tart to occupy any brain cells in my head. I know who she is. I am mad as hell that I know who she is. So if I can't restrict media culture in my life, what chance does a 12-year-old have? Seriously, what chance does a 12-year-old have? So therefore, and it's funny because in my role as a head of school, I mean, I did the eulogy for children who died. Because for many of my families, we were the church. We were their version of a church or synagogue. We were the moral community in their lives. And independent schools are that. They are a moral community, a community of role models and role model behavior. And parents value it, and they know that with all of the burdens we put on public education and public school teachers, it's a culture that is becoming increasingly difficult for public school to replicate that. And I say that with so much respect and affection from my colleagues in public education. The model has made it very hard to provide the kind of community that independent schools are known for. So that's number 3. 2 left. Number 2 is, we're going back because of the relationship my children have with their teachers. Fascinating to me, relationship of the teacher trumps skill of the teacher. Now, clearly, independent school parents expect both. They expect the skilled teacher, but they're smart enough to understand that the magic, between a teacher and a child, in my profession, a teacher walks into a classroom, closes the door, and makes the weather. Makes the weather in that classroom. When alumni, college alumni, are asked to fill out surveys of their experience, in independent schools, middle schools, high schools, what they say over and over again is that the single most powerful value-added part of the experience was their relationship with their teachers. the people who knew them, taught them, coached them, cared about them, pushed them, believed in them when they weren't so sure about themselves, cared enough about them to be lovingly critical and helpful. The relationship is a motivating factor in the independent school community. And then the number one reason why parents said they were going back, and this requires a little bit of explanation, but the number one reason was safety. Now, clearly, very few independent schools are located in dangerous neighborhoods. And very few kids come to independent schools living in dangerous neighborhoods. So it's not physical safety. I mean, in part, certainly it's physical safety. But parents said over and over again that their belief was that their children felt safe. In every way a child can feel safe when they walk in this door. They feel socially safe. They feel emotionally safe. They feel known. They feel that they're known as a student. They're known as a person. They're known as a member of a family. They're known as a member of a social group. And the teacher knows their relative position in that social group, and the teacher is able to help manage and moderate the social position of children in the social group. You know, we have an epidemic of bullying in America in public schools. It's aggravated by online bullying, which can occur, not just occurring during the school day, it's occurring 24 hours a day and on weekends and on the summer. But parents do believe that maybe the heart of the experience is the fact that when children come here, they can learn. The environment is such that, information comes into the five senses, and before it gets to the intellectual brain, it goes to the emotional brain. And the surrounding bleeds into how the information is received. It's background noise in learning, but it's pretty critical background noise when you're 5 or 9 or 13. Not significant when you're in law school. You walk into a law school class, nobody likes you, they all think you're an idiot, doesn't matter. It's not going to interfere with learning. By that point, you've already made peace with yourself and who you are. But boy, the environmental stuff, the relationship stuff, so incredibly important as part of the experience. It's expensive. I mean, it breaks my heart that we can't make this work for all American kids through public education. And I think there are things that could be done, but I'm not a political figure, and I've had my years trying to work through politics, and I left public education. Ultimately, I left 20 years in, and I walked out. I said, it's not going to work in my lifetime. But when parents would say to me, or my college roommates, looking for advice, Doug, you're head of a private school, I've got 3 kids, what do you think? And I would say, well, I know it's expensive, but think of it this way. What can you give your kids that will last forever? What can you give your children that will last forever? I think you can give them 3 things. You can love them unconditionally. That will last forever. It certainly last forever. To be loved unconditionally. Because they may not get that, even from their spouse or their children, someday. But from mom and dad, you can come into this life and live your life being loved unconditionally by 2 people. And you can count on it. And you should count on it. And you should know that you can count on it. I think the second thing you can give your children that will last forever is a family name that they can be proud of. A family history, family stories. A family name that will inspire them in the good times, the boom, heady times of their lives, but will also protect them and sustain them and comfort them in the trial times of their lives. And it's so important for kids to know their family stories, to know their family history, to know about mom and dad and their childhood and how they fell in love and what they love about each other and what they believe makes life worth living. They should know all of that. They should know all of that. I made it easier. I read a couple of books with my kids. And these were books like Tuck Everlasting, which is a book about a child who has a decision to make, and the decision is to drink from the well and have everlasting life. or allow life to have a beginning, middle, and end. And for me, I read that book. I read the book to each of my children individually when they were about 9 years old. And afterwards we talked about death. We talked about life. We talked about life having an ending. And we talked about why life has an ending. So I think that's the second thing you can give your children that will last forever, a family. And then I think the third thing that you can give your children that will last forever is, the very best early start in formal learning that's available to you wherever your geography is. There's a time of life that all of us have known. You've heard the expression wonder years. The wonder years represents a time of life when everything was interesting. Now, the wonder years are 5, 6, 7, 8. Those are the wonder years. The kids they can't get enough of the world. And sometimes adults say, "Oh my gosh, I can't take it that he can't focus on anything. My son is not paying attention." And I would say, well, actually, that's not true. Your son is paying attention. He's paying attention to everything, all at once. So don't tell me he's not paying attention. The goal here is to have them focus on one thing at a time. But they are paying attention, okay? Because the world is just awesome to a child who's still trying to understand it and figure it out. That expression, the wonder years, I know people for whom the wonder years never ends. Never ends. I'll give you an example of somebody who you know, and that is an adult who was a parent at Greenwich Country Day School who has never gotten over the wonder years, finds everything interesting, as do his children. Ron Howard. The movie director Ron Howard. Ron Howard is interested in bird watching. Ron Howard is interested in chess and stamp collecting and languages and travel, and I've spent time with this guy. He and I took the Greenwich Country Day School chess team to Arkansas for the National Chess Tournament. And here we are, we're stuck in Little Rock, Arkansas, which to me is, oh my gosh, I can't believe, have you ever been to Little Rock, Arkansas? Oh my gosh, Stamford is a metropolis compared. Ron Howard and I, we dropped the kids off, let me tell you, the guy, everything was interesting to him. And it was the same with his kids. Everything was interesting to those kids. So, I don't think those years ever happen. And I think, and I've lived in Greenwich, so I've seen life lived as well as it can be lived materially. But what I've learned from that experience, and from Ron Howard and some other people, is that I think the people who have the best lives are not necessarily the people who have the most comforts, but they are the people who have the most interests. Because people who have a lot of interests, people who are interested in everything, they're never bored, they're rarely lonely, they're constantly finding stimulation. They find stimulation in art, in the natural world, in music, in faith, in friendships and relationships, in travel, in pets, And you find those people in every economic strata. I had Greenwich Country Day School families who are fabulously wealthy and fabulously bored. I had Greenwich Country Day School families, multi-millionaires, not many, but a number of multi-millionaires. Didn't have a password, never traveled to Europe. Seriously? Seriously. How many times have you been to Disney World? We take the kids to Disney World every March. Oh my gosh, take them somewhere where the castles are real. Look, they've seen mock castles, for the last 7 years. How about Scotland? So, enough already. You can tell I can talk for a long time on this topic, but I'll end by saying you've made a very smart choice here. This is a place where the wonder years last for a very long time.